Good day, everyone. Welcome to Leprechaun Alley. My name is Ray Carey Perillo, and today we have
Michael G. Perillo, and we are
Leprechaun Alley. So welcome to Leprechaun Alley.
Yes.
So we're just kind of having different conversations today about things that we were talking about. And, I was thinking in the future, it would be very interesting to do analysis, to have a conversation about the way that we have mood disorders or personalities organized in our culture in terms of something considered maladaptive. And then I said, you know what, it might be actually kind of interesting to discuss them and have an organic conversation about what that might look like. And the reason that I like to do this is because I want people to participate in this. While we have studied astrology for years, everybody has their own individual knowledge that they've also pulled from a variety of resources and sources. And I really just want this to be like, you know what, we just walked up and ran into each other in the park and just started having a fun conversation. So that, well, you know what, let's throw this in the mix and see what happens.
What we will do that is not typical of the way of the subject matters that we cover. What we do with these is that it's the first time that we're discussing this live. So you're getting the process through which we think and formulate the conditions of planets and astrological signs, and as much as many other topics in our lives about Ukraine, about Johnny Depp, and we try to cover everything that we can think of, and connecting that also astrologically, because there is some basis of truth there. So we'll go on with something new for today.
Okay, so let's see. So the first one I was going to start with, I think probably everybody's most familiar with, is I'm going to just use, let's see if they have. All right. We're going to start with major depressive disorder. And by the way, everyone, this is for entertainment purposes only. We are not doctors, none of those things. We are only talking about this in a colloquial sense, the way that you and I understand this with each other in the population. So a simple description for the major depressive disorder, and this is coming from the Mayo Clinic website, is it's just prolonged and persistent periods of extreme sadness. So I was looking at the words prolonged and persistent periods of extreme sadness. So what planet would you affiliate with that?
Well, I would have to put more than one planet together. I would say it's a combination of the moon and Saturn.
Yeah, me too. That's most people probably would go there with that. Yeah,
this is where you would probably find the moodiness, and then of course the Saturn, the Capricorn influence of sadness. And why would Capricorn be sad? A very simple reason. It's Capricorn wants to excel in society, wants to move up further and further. So they're motivated from the sadness of not accomplishing it to trying everything in their power to get there. So that's why I mentioned Saturn, which rules Capricorn.
I think that's very interesting, because I think also in terms of looking at Capricorn and looking at King Arthur and comparing the relative Christ consciousness aspect.
Let's tell the audience that King Arthur is the mythological figure that's associated with Capricorn and the 10th house of the zodiac.
The natural 10th.
The natural 10th house.
Yes.
Exactly. Not your birth 10th house, because that has to be calculated. But we're talking about the order of his astrological signs, Capricorn being the 10th sign and the sign of what is known in astrology as the sign of Christ. It is, again, the mythological figure that represents the kind of qualities that Capricorn brings, and that would be King Arthur, fairness to all human beings.
Yeah. So interesting that, of course, we would go with the planet Saturn, and it would be some version of the moon that may be affiliated with that. And of course, what is the first place we would go is looking at maybe the history or the myth, whichever it is, of King Arthur. the thing first and foremost to note when we're looking at categories of organization in terms of maladaptive mental states, let's just say that.
Well, let's say
It's
that
culturally, what I want to say is it's inherently culturally biased. This is maladaptive relative to the culture that we live in. And it's interesting, really, that the major, most common disorder that we have is this general depression. And when you look at Saturn and when you look at the individual's desire and yen for some type of upward advancement, upward mobility, bam, that makes complete sense.
well, here's the reason why Moon and Saturn seem to be the proper planets to look at is that the Moon provokes emotion. There's emotion feeling. So feeling is part of what we have as the sense of sadness. And Saturn represents the Capricorn nature of empathy, a certain amount of uh, change in mood from time when time goes on. And sadness takes time to get rid of. We
Right.
go through the emotion that oftentimes we're not even aware that we're sad. So the moon is at work, but not always very obvious, as would be when somebody explodes with feeling. Sadness is sort
That's
of
interesting.
repressed. It's sort of repressed feeling, and that's why Saturn would be the one that would then create this whole scenario of sadness and desire to find a way out of that sadness.
Who knows? We may end up talking about this particular piece of it, the whole show, because there's a lot that comes to mind when I'm thinking of this. For example, um, something that we hear a lot about is when we do have, we go to counselors and therapists and what have you. What we find are symptoms that are referred to as treatment resistant. So I think what's
It's
interesting,
beautiful that you said that
yeah,
because moon creates the impetus or the change or the going ons of what we're feeling. But it's Saturn that has us holding on to what we have as memory, what we've gone through in time. And we're familiar with the state of lacking. We're lacking something. That's the Saturn effect because it takes time to get over that lacking of understanding or good feeling.
I my mind is just exploding right now because this is really, sometimes you think of something and you're like, nope, that's as far as it goes. And sometimes you think of something, you're like, wow, there's a lot of places this is going already.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so the treatment resistance. So interesting that. So
Well,
I'm
why don't we
curious. Yeah, go
give
ahead.
a suggestion as to what we do with this sadness when we know that we have sadness? Well, the first thing is to perhaps simple as just close your eyes and let yourself wander in your own mind. Just wander. Not trying to direct anything, not going back to what makes you feel sad, but just taking in account of what sadness is really like in your system. You're, in other words, discovering the real discovery is your moon nature and your Saturn nature.
Well, it really feels like, yeah, philosophically speaking as well, that this particular mood disorder is affiliated with our need and desire to advance.
When we know that these two things, these two planets are involved, then we know that we have recourse that's instantaneous, and that would be using the moon. The moon changes rapidly. So we can count on something changing even if Saturn is still holding on to us because Saturn takes a very long process of change. So then once we understand the difference between the way the moon is affecting us and Saturn is affecting us, we then understand that we can easily go from one emotional state to another, which could help with being sad or eliminating sadness, and then take an account of how long is it going to take with Saturn applying this sad mood. When we have understanding, we pretty much eliminate all the planetary effects when there is understanding. And understanding is something that most human beings don't feel that they have from others. But the real problem is, have we taken enough time to give understanding to ourselves.
Right. And in terms of what advancement really means for us, also interesting that we're talking about a planet that is an Earth, a sign that is an Earth sign, which is Capricorn, but also Aquarius
You're
as
talking
well.
about Saturn,
Yes.
which is
Well, and I was going
Capricorn.
to say also Aquarius as well.
Aquarius also, because Saturn has the ability to teach.
Right.
It is disciplined by nature, which is represented by Capricorn, and it is somewhat intellectual or universal brotherhood kind of sense, because this is how human beings get to become comfortable with each other, is over time when they get to know each other. So Saturn has these two qualities of Aquarius and Capricorn. And Aquarius, of course, is the brotherhood of man. It's the higher inspiration. It's about unity of what we unify through understanding, through knowledge. So sadness is something which is oftentimes lacking in knowledge.
Right. Well, right. So I was thinking, a remedy for this, and by all means, this is a philosophical conversation. This is not dismissive by any stretch of the imagination for what each individual has to do for themselves. Um, but I've had my modes. I've certainly endured depression. I've certainly endured complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I've certainly endured a variety of uh, different modalities throughout my life, and it has been really helpful to analyze those things planetarily as well. So a solution, which is interesting, is that because Saturn lives in two spaces, Capricorn and Aquarius, the solution to what we value is a graduation from focusing on the material to merging with the spiritual and shifting the way that we view that. So graduating from.
Well, we mentioned Saturn and we mentioned the moon. The moon fluctuates rapidly. So even our state of sadness has many components to it. It's not one thing or another, but it seems to be something which has an effect on us, whether we like it or not. But there's another part of our state of sadness which belongs to Saturn, and that is that it takes a while to reach point of sadness. It takes a long time, and usually a lack of understanding, a lack of progress. Understanding is represented by Aquarius, the knowledge bearer. He bears water. Water is intelligence, and he is an air sign, but he spreads intelligence. That is his function as the water bearer. And we go to Saturn with using Capricorn. It is again the round table of King Arthur. And this was achieved only through a great understanding. Again, understanding, but this time understanding in the nature of man. Whereas with Aquarius is an understanding of awareness, of knowledge. But Capricorn is an awareness of our position in life, that we all belong, that we all have needs. So we see sadness as a lack of the being connected with these positive aspects. So each time we look at astrology, we can say, well, Saturn is a negative planet, but it brings positive results when knowledge has been discovered, when one has become cognizant of his duties on Earth and his interaction with other human beings. So sadness is a sort of a lonely state. It's being separated from other human beings. It's being separated. It's the self being separated from himself or herself. When we're sad, we're lacking something other that would make us happy, and we're aware of the fact that we're lacking happiness.
It might even be helpful to discuss this in terms of what this would look like in each astrological sign. Like, what would it look like, for example?
Well, that would be another way to take it apart and see how each sign might deal with it.
Yeah, like what would a depressed Aries look like, or an Aries that's feeling depressed? What would that look like? It might actually look like them punching and breaking something.
Mm,
Could.
being that I am an Aries by sun sign, and I know quite a few Arians, when Aries is sad, it is almost the same as depressed. It doesn't have, it has a short fuse. It goes from not feeling happy to depression. When the Aries finally acknowledges sadness, it is almost over for the Aries. It becomes useless. He may not commit suicide because it's not typical of Aries to do that, but he would be in that mode. It would like giving up completely. And the only way he can recover, and again, this is because you need to understand your astrological makeup. The only way to give up this ability to give up is to um, not think about what might result if you were to act or not to act. In other words, just let the state of sadness expend itself. And sometimes that means simply doing nothing. And that would be the Aries, because Aries is about doing everything. And sadness would then cause him to do nothing. And he will recover from that. That would be the Aries nature.
Well,
I would
this is
say
a
sadness is
really,
much worse for a Taurus.
I would say so too, and also
Yeah.
because it's a feminine sign. I was going to say Aries is I feel like Aries. Not that we think of them that way, but they're a very mental sign,
Right.
and
Yes,
their
it's true.
will and their mind is they're connected.
Right. Right. They are.
Yeah.
They do dwell in the mind more than is ever made mention of by most astrologers.
Right.
Most astrologers completely overlook the sign Aries
Yeah.
because, well, all they say about it is that
Well,
it's
martial arts is almost a form of meditation for an Aries.
well, that's
that they
true.
got something going on while they're
Right,
kicking
right.
someone's ass.
So that is
Yeah.
the
A little
Aries is-
Robin Hood.
yeah,
Yeah.
Aries would be unique in this sense. It doesn't
Yeah.
play out its sadness that well because it becomes disabled. The active Aries, because action in
Oh,
Aries
yeah,
is
that would really
synonymous.
be.
Yeah, Aries is synonymous with the word action.
Mhm.
It is the beginning of life. It acts. It acts out of the nothing. So when it goes to the nothing, it restores itself. And Aries has this ability. It's almost innate. This is not understood by most astrologers because they never make mention of something like this. They go more to other signs which seem to consolidate certain energies.
Well, yeah, it's not something, but yeah, Taurus, that would be interesting. That would be so, right. So this would also be something that would be about an attachment to the material.
Well, the Taurus would act out their sadness in many ways. They'll either become uh, inhibited, where they won't speak to anyone, or they may become um, an obstacle to everybody that meets them because they have
That's
to.
interesting.
Their sadness has to have something return. They need a reason to feel that this is the reason they're sad. So they may even promote a certain kind of disorder, a certain kind of disagreement with others when they're sad, because their sadness means that the world of beauty around them, their ability to maintain balance, is gone. And for that moment, they seem to have almost no rules that apply to them.
I can almost feel that.
Where Taurian men and women are usually very elegant. They represent beauty and balance.
Yeah, Taurian men are sometimes known as a gentleman of the zodiac.
Right. And oftentimes considered to be the romantic ones. For instance, Rudolph Valentino, which I'm sure anyone listening to this,
or Ferdinand the Peaceful Bull.
Very few people that are listening to this even know who Rudolph Valentino was. But he was considered the flame of the 40s, the 30s, and the 40s. He was like, people died for him. And he was a Taurus, an Italian Taurian. And it turned out that he had one side of his face was disordered, and he'd only allow himself to be filmed from one side of his face. This was Rudolph Valentino. No one knows about him anymore. I grew up knowing about Rudolph Valentino.
Oh.
But that's your Taurus.
When I was listening to Krishnamurti speak last night, when we were listening to David Bohm talk, I thought it was so fascinating how Gosh, I really have to learn to start taking snapshots and characterizing how they use their vocabulary because they're having the same conversation, but he's having it in a very Taurian manner. And
Well, Taurus is also mental, but it's very different from Aries.
yeah,
The Taurus mentality is brought down to earth.
it's tangible.
It's
Yeah, it's
right.
really tangible.
It's
Yeah.
something you can measure. It's something that you can relate to because it's grounded in human experience. It isn't just an idea in the mind that just floats there sometime and other times immediate. The Aries is unpredictable in that regard, whereas the Taurian is not. Their ability is to apply in a very concise and balanced way,
Mm.
because Taurians are very mental. I mean, mathematics is basically pretty much pronounced by many of the Taurians.
Yeah,
Many
absolutely.
Taurians are very calculated. They understand things very
Right,
well,
like the snake.
and they're able to teach
Mhm.
in ways that most other signs cannot.
Right.
Even better than the Aries. The Aries has ideas, but they move so quickly that half
Yeah.
of them are missed, and the ones that are not missed, he doesn't really have a good way of relating to them, to others, because he understands them from his perspective, and oftentimes only from his perspective. So that makes a
So
difference.
Taurine would become maybe even depressed in the midst of something there was a lot of
Well,
chaos.
Taurian
A lot if
depression
they were
is usually
exposed to a lot of
serious.
violence.
There's
Yeah.
seriousness, and it can convert to violence because it is the application of the self to the environment.
But if they're exposed to a lot of violence too, that will really solidify.
Well, that would
Yeah.
that a lot of violence may turn them hard, and it may turn them into criminals.
Oh,
Taurus has that ability, that because it sees things as concrete, and only when it sees force, it understands that force is the way, so they turn into force.
interesting. So
The Aries is ignoring
manifesting
all
the
of this.
tangible into the criminal. I
Right.
like
Well,
it. Yeah.
it gets applied. It's application.
It's still adaptive. Yeah.
Aries is the thinking
Uh-huh.
that's going on, but Taurus is the one who applies the thought. And so sadness is something deeper for a Taurus,
Wow.
but it's not the worst condition. Taurus is
Right.
not the worst condition for
Okay,
sadness.
that's true.
So we go to what? Want to go to the next
Right, because
sign?
they create and they can recreate something. Yeah. So I
Hmm.
guess
Well,
I guess
they
what would
rule-
it for the Gemini? Well, that's interesting.
So just to finish up on
Oh,
Taurus, Taurus is driven by Venus, and Venus is about making everything beautiful. But let's keep in mind that Venus is also responsible for the creation of wars. So Taurus has this ability to go to war, but the Taurian war is more found in his ability to remain disciplined and to be concise, like a drill sergeant. Now let's go to Gemini.
Gemini. Yeah. What was that depression for
Well,
them?
Gemini, it's
Well, we're watching it play out in Johnny Depp, for example.
sadness in a Gemini is a dangerous place for Gemini.
Yeah.
Because Gemini which is ruled by Mercury, rules the process of the mind. And so when there is sadness, it affects the mental quality of Gemini. When we look at Johnny Depp and he's giving his testimony, we can see that he's thinking, and that his thinking is a little bit, what would you call it, jargoned?
It's slow.
Disheveled.
Yeah, it's slow. Yeah,
It's disheveled.
it's a little messy. Mhm.
It's not clear on how he wants to accept a discussion or
Yeah.
get involved in a
He's having a hard
discussion,
time talking.
because
Yeah.
depression would cause him to almost short fuse his brain. In other words, his mind is
Right.
no longer working fluently,
Mm.
because the Gemini mind is very fluent. It's very almost liquefied, which is what we
Yeah.
consider Mercury. Mercury is a metal, so it has substance, but it liquefies in almost any type of temperature.
Like you could see that expressed when we say like a Gemini dog, bad head, good heart, for example. You could see that expressed in that way.
The bad head would come because the mind is affected, but the heart doesn't necessarily get affected. It's ruled by other elements. So Gemini would have a difficult time with it, and they would be the ones who would get violent, but it would not be in their nature to. But
Right.
they would get violent
Mhm.
because It would be only out of doing something to break the monotony of being frozen,
Mm,
let's say, not able to think clearly.
that would make sense.
And his thinking might also be very confusing. Uh, and he won't notice that because he's lost touch with the processes of the brain. And this is what Gemini rules, is the mind.
Oh,
So
yeah.
if you want to reach a Gemini when they're sad,
Earth people would actually be able to deal with that
well, how you
better.
deal with Taurus, you would have to be consistently reliable to
Right.
them. With Gemini, talk to them.
Yeah.
The more
Okay.
you talk to them, the more you restore some of their brain waves, because they start to follow you as a means to
Oh,
reconstruct what's
good
going on in
idea.
their own
Yeah.
minds.
Yeah.
They're leaning on your mental ability to stay stable, and then they start to follow, just like Mercury would spread in the direction of least resistance, like liquid. So they would, even though they may appear not to listen to you, they would be listening to you.
Right.
There is a part of them that is completely open to
Yeah.
you. And that would be the best way to get them out of sadness, or for them to get out of sadness, is to go to their friends who talk to them a lot, not to just people who are good buddies and they're drinking buddies. No, they don't need drinking buddies. They need friends who love them and who are like amateur psychologists or
They have
amateur.
to go through a process inside of themselves to see if they can trust you when you're speaking to them.
Well,
Like,
they trust you
everything
when
has to connect back up.
they will
Yeah.
trust you when what you have to say is meaningful to
Right.
them,
Right.
and
Right.
they start to hear you repeat
Right.
over and over. It's like
Right.
listening to music. If it's the
Right.
right chords,
Yeah.
there's a soothing. But if it's the wrong chords, it's disturbing.
Yeah.
So naturally, you'd have to know your Gemini friend to be a consultant. And the Gemini himself or herself would have to be smart enough to know that if it wants to end sadness, and that's another problem. When people are sad, they tend to want to
Right.
remain sad.
Yeah, and you have to deal with the crazy back and forth in the head all the time.
And
Yeah.
the problem with sadness is that it does give us a certain amount of pleasure.
Right.
It's
Oh, yeah, here we go.
not a positive kind of
Yeah.
pleasure, but
Yeah.
it's a pleasure. Why is it pleasure? Because we get sad many, many, many times through life. And the pleasure comes from being acquainted with sadness. We know what that state is like. And there's a certain comfort because you are isolated.
Right, familiarity has its own comfort.
You've isolated yourself into this state of
Right.
sadness. And there's a certain kind of protection that it also offers. It is not just a negative quality. Nothing is all negative or all positive.
Right.
So sadness has to be understood for how it is being um, not so much orchestrated, but by how it is being handled by the self.
Yeah, it's and yeah, when we're looking at Gemini too, I was thinking we would have to hold their attention in as steady of a state as we possibly could, because really what's going on behind that is anxiety.
The other thing that will
Yeah.
work with Gemini with sadness is to take them away from the area where they are associated with sadness. Environmental change for a
Right.
Gemini is
Yeah.
extremely important.
You're right. You're right.
Take them out of wherever
Yeah.
their sadness is. If it happens
Yeah.
to be with another person, take them away from that person for a short time. Take them to, if they like being out in the field, take them to a valley or a
Yeah,
countryside.
you know what? That's Channing, our friend Channing did that. He's Gemini. During COVID, he was, had to be laid off. Nobody could really work or anything. So he socially distanced himself, and then he just kind of drove around the country and kind of changed the area.
Mm.
And the difference in him is night and
Because
day.
this
Yeah,
stimulates the mind, and sadness
yeah,
has all to do with the mind.
yeah, and it's always worked like that for him. As soon as he moves
Right,
around,
right,
it's
right.
really helped him a lot. He's definitely
Well, I
someone like
have I
that.
had a brother, and I had a sister. Both of them were younger than me. They were very much like that, especially my brother.
Mm.
But my brother was smart enough not to stay in the state of sadness because he moved around like crazy. He was always somewhere. He'd say hello to you, and a minute later you turn around and he disappeared on you because he was always on the move. So that's a strong quality of Gemini is their environment.
And by the way, we are doing live astrology readings by request. So we're
Exactly.
just
That's why
talking
we're here.
until someone makes the request. We should probably mention that more
Yeah, we're
often.
here to do astrology readings for anyone. We'll not complete astrology readings, but we'll give you enough to make it interesting for
So,
you. And
and
again,
something else for you to go research. You know, I always like the little tidbits that I can go, oh my gosh, I've never heard of that before. Let's dig into that.
right,
Yeah.
right. And what you'll see is that we're creating this interpretation right on the spot. This has not been researched. We haven't had time to put notes together and create the storybook reading. No, we're
Yes,
creating
we've
it
been
out
saying
of
that
our
that's
minds.
coming. We are doing that too now.
We're
Yes.
creating it out of our minds, which show you that we have references and that we have to then understand how these reference points, such as astrological positions, planetary positions, how they may affect each other. And then to apply that to you personally, you're not going to hear us say the same thing twice to anyone. There may be some things that we'll say twice when it comes to the astrological values, but not to the reading of the individual.
Yeah. So Gemini. So Gemini, Cancer. Now that's going to
We
be
get to the
interesting.
sign Cancer.
Right.
This is a very complicated person to deal with sadness.
You know, and by the way, I wanted to say something interesting. In general, with Aries or Taurus, it's almost like depression is a pretty easy fix. That's not what they don't run into problems with, though, with the mood disorders because they're just very straightforward signs. They're like the original mom and dad. They're Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Or
With Cancer, you run into a lot of problems with sadness. First of all,
yeah.
self-denial.
Mm.
Cancer is ruled by the moon, and the moon deals with a compartmentalization of the entire body.
Right.
Cancer is the first sign that creates the body. All the parts are there. They're all communicating with one another. So when you're dealing with people born in the month of Cancer,
And the process of regeneration
right,
starts.
what you're dealing with is someone who's having contact all around their system. So when they become sad, it's almost as if their body goes into a freeze position where they just become frozen. The process of integration seems to almost halt. It almost seems to cease. And what you'll get with Cancer is anger with sadness because they are in joy, the sense of joyfulness, the sense of comfort, the sense of being integrated and knowing where they are all the time. When they become sad, they're like in a closed room, not knowing what to do. And usually they'll lash out at people that they love most. This would be a Cancerian reaction to sadness. They will play it out by refusing to talk to someone, refusing to tell someone what they feel. They generally don't attack other people when they're sad. The other two signs might, Gemini and Taurus might. But with the Cancer, what we get is almost a refusal to let other people into who they are.
Yeah.
It is already difficult for Cancer to allow people to
Right. It is right
enter their
to begin
person.
with. Yeah.
When they become sad,
Right.
they feel abandoned. They feel abandoned by
Mm.
themselves.
Right.
So this is a psychological event going on with sadness. It gets much more emotionally charged.
Yeah, it's this is where things get tough because inside of it, it's not just that they don't know what they have a difficult time letting people in. They don't know what they need. And when even if somebody else does know what they need because they themselves don't know what they because they themselves don't know what they need, that they can't trust that, and it makes it that much more difficult because part of us getting our needs met is some part of us knowing what we need, and that piece is sort of missing. They really have to search for that. So and that's where it becomes very challenging, and that's why I would say when you get into there, that's where we get treatment resistance.
So we know
That's where that goes.
we know the
Yeah.
Cancer is more emotional than most other signs, and oftentimes their sadness may be expressed by them not quite attacking others, but being rude
Yeah.
to others, like lay off, get away from me.
And sometimes we might get sick of it.
They,
Sometimes we might lose
but
patience with
they,
it, and at this, on the other hand, that we might just like,
but they'll play
yeah,
out their sadness.
right,
They'll almost make it look like it was your fault that they're sad.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, because somebody has to be
right,
responsible, and they've lost the ability to connect with
right,
themselves.
right.
So now they have to uh, uh, elect someone else to take the blame for
Right.
their state of mind.
I think that might be part of the fix too, if there was some way to place all of that someplace for them where they can organize it and order it again. Somebody has to be responsible. However that comes up, that would be part of the,
One of the
you
things that
know,
we should have mentioned about the feminine signs when there's sadness, like Taurus and Cancer,
yeah.
there would be a tendency for drinking as one of the ways to deal with
Oh
sadness.
yeah.
You
Oh
won't
yeah.
see that so much with Aries or with
No.
Gemini, because they're yang signs and they're
Right.
outward. They're looking for overt means, whereas the introverted signs, which are the yin signs, Taurus, Cancer, every other sign
Right.
follows their type, their polarity. So Cancer is a very difficult one. It takes a long time to get them out of their sadness, if at all. They're the ones that can prolong sadness for a long, long time because it gets associated with their emotional nature. And since emotion is an important part of Cancer, the sadness might linger along. One way that sadness might disappear from the Cancer is he falls in love. If he falls in love, it practically makes sadness disappear
That's true.
because he's
Yeah.
emotional
Yeah.
and he is now focused on something new.
Yeah.
So he becomes cured in a way.
Yeah.
But that's not true of all people because there are those who are just intending to be in whatever state they're in.
Right.
But we're speaking about the normal, the average person of whatever sign we discuss.
Oh, that's kind of interesting. So now what would, oh,
When we go to Leo,
Leo.
well, now Leo is that's the jewel of the Nile. It's ruled by the sun.
We all know how they deal with depression.
Where it's ruled by the sun, and whatever they do, they'd have to do it in a very, very
Loud way.
loud and obvious way, and pronounced to the whole
They are
world.
depressed and they orgasm very loud,
Right.
all at the same time.
They're oppressed, but they're on the
Yeah.
stage acting out every minute of the way.
The world must witness.
There would be the type that would make an excuse because they're sad. But when their behavior was because I wasn't myself. But the Leo is a sign that represents dignity, royalty, pride, and sadness is something that they're not quite willing to admit to.
Right.
Leo is too big to
Right.
be sad. It's
Right.
too honorable to reach that level. So you would have this psychodynamic events going on with Leos when they're sad.
They create theater to avoid it.
If they become
That's so
criminal,
interesting.
it becomes almost synonymous with the fact that they have abandoned their role as disciplined, honorable people. So sadness becomes an excuse to
Oh, and then it becomes all is lost,
abandon everything for the time that they're sad.
but when all isn't lost, it gets confusing.
Yeah, they'll
yeah.
get involved in some form
And
of
then they kind of get
repercussion.
themselves into trouble.
Right.
I
They'll
see.
cause problems
Yeah.
when they're not feeling themselves. I mean, they already cause problems when they're feeling good. So when they're feeling sad, although I can also say that it depends on the type of Leo. If the Leo has been constantly honorable in his life, then sadness is something that he takes to his heart with his mind. And Leo can be very honorable and not causing damage or harm to other people while they're sad. But what will happen to a weaker type of Leo, and that is one who has to prove his prowess, has to prove that he is great and he is the best, sadness might take on some rather violent behavior with Leo, but
Yeah.
it's usually temporary.
Yeah.
But it can be violent because they start to engage in the state of anger. So sadness starts to bring on anger.
You know
For
what this makes me think of too is just that, even the conversations that we're having about, how different people do different things or create different offenses. I I think, gosh, if we just kept taking these things apart and seeing each other like this and looking at each other like this, we would be so much further ahead of solving the ills of society and our neighbors. And instead of looking at people thinking that we're above doing anything about their situation, all of a sudden we have these tools at our command to go, oh, you know what? I do know what to do in this situation. Maybe if I
Karen,
do this or that, this will help.
what you're saying,
And we open ourselves back up to people again because we feel capable and equipped to do it.
to capsulize what you've just said, uh, the whole thing is for all the signs that we go through, it's to know thyself. If
Right.
you know thyself, you will tend to correct many, many different aspects of deranged state of or unpleasant state of mind. Sadness is certainly not one of the worst conditions that you can be in. There are many worse. But sadness is something that affects us from time to time. And oftentimes we don't even know why we got sad.
Right.
And sadness can be also an event where we're separated from the enthusiasm and the activity that we're involved in. And all of a sudden, it seems to be as if we've just dropped out into a vacuum where nothing is happening. And we just all of a sudden may have this sense of sadness only because we're not familiar
Ah, the
with
sense of sadness.
we're not familiar with our other bigger side, and we get to this part which reduces us to disappointment.
Right.
Sadness usually comes after disappointment.
Now, but that's right. But now that's the more temporary sadness that's not so persistent. That's
Mm, mm.
more that's more now see, that would be
But
more of a moon.
if we had brought that in, this
Yeah.
disappointment mode, for instance, Arians almost never react with disappointment. They almost just ignore it because they're too busy acting anew.
Right.
Whereas
Right. Right.
Taurus
Arians are like, don't worry, I'm gonna create something else
is
anyway.
something else.
I didn't care about that last thing. I lost interest. Yeah.
Whereas the Taurus, when it becomes disappointed, it starts to look for faults and what happened, what did it do wrong, and is it being, did anybody else do something wrong?
Oh,
And Gemini
yeah.
disappointment would be simply
Yeah.
because, for Gemini, disappointment comes because they've lost the art of gab. They love to talk.
Right, right, right.
They love to express.
Mm.
They love to see changes all around them. And when they momentarily lose that because of other conditions, whether that's forced on them or it just happens, then they may get sad. And we've already covered the sadness of the Gemini. It's easy to oftentimes correct it by bringing them back to life. And life means movement for Gemini.
Yeah.
Movement, mental and physical. Leo, of course, is more dramatic
Yeah.
when they're
Well, they're
sad.
also big. I mean, they have big hearts, and they're always they're very yeah.
But
So everything
oftentimes,
is big.
but
Yeah,
oftentimes they tend to bleed falsely.
they do. Yeah,
They show, they
right.
make a big case out of what they're
It's because
feeling,
they're bored.
and they
That's
have to make a promotion
need
out of it.
something to do. Yeah.
It has to be broadcasted, and they're bleeding, they're dying. It's the lion in the woods with the little thorn in his
Right.
paw, and he's
Yeah.
crying because he's got pain until a mouse comes by and takes his pain away.
Yeah.
by removing the thorn out of his paw.
They do usually snap out of it. Leo's usually, I
Well, yeah,
mean,
the Leo will recover.
worst case scenario with Leos is that they're just perpetually bitchy. Like they're just those Leos that
Well, what would easily get what easily
I had
gets
an aunt that was a
Leo.
little like that.
Yeah, you can't really talk them out of their sadness, but if you get them
I
motivated
loved
to,
her.
if you get them motivated enough to act and do something, then Leo is very similar to Aries. They're busy doing something,
Yeah.
and that will just completely dismiss a sad state because there's no room for it.
Well, and the other thing about Leos is that, right, because it's like month of the monkey,
Right.
they're funny. They're accidentally funny all the time, even when they're mad. The way because they have such great minds, when they say something, it's funny, and so they make other people start laughing.
But like
So
the monkey,
and that makes it hard for them to stay miserable too.
but like the monkey, they make a bunch of action. They slap people, or they slapped other monkeys around.
Yes.
They act like
Yes.
morons.
If you keep them out of jail,
and then moments later, they're
fine.
back to normal, like
Right,
nothing
right.
ever. Not me. Virgo.
Oof. Oh.
Now, this can also be another
Virgo's rough.
complicated thing here. Virgo. Virgo's
I
also
really feel for this sign.
Virgo is also ruled by Mercury, so there's something liquid in the way their minds flow.
Yeah.
The problem with Virgo is that, according to astrology, Virgo takes place during the time of harvest for the northern hemisphere.
Right.
And so it is said to be the sign of self-undoing. It is self-destructive because the harvest means that plants stop growing and we have to collect the fruit. And one of the things that is not understood why Virgo is called a virgin, and why is it the only sign, the only one that of the mutable signs, that is the only one that doesn't express dual qualities in its way it appears. For instance, Gemini has two twins. The next one, Sagittarius, mutable sign, is half man, half horse. Did I miss one of the mutables? Virgo. I didn't. I'm going to talk about Virgo last.
Yeah,
and then Pisces, the two fish. But Virgo, why is it dualistic? Because it is both a virgin in its thinking, it's pure. A seed has to begin from purity, and then it grows into a plant. And then there is sorrow because the plant has spent itself, and now you have the fruit. So Virgo, as the virgin, is also the month of the chicken in China. And what does the chicken do? It feeds people forever, making eggs never stop.
Yeah.
There are no other animals that produce as many eggs as a chicken.
It really is the perfect food, and it's a universal.
And it's a perfect food. So when we get to Virgo, we have some complexities to deal with. We have the fact that it's a sign of self-undoing. In other words, Virgo is its own enemy. And when we do charts, Virgo is the natural sixth house of the zodiac. And the sixth house in Western astrology is the house of enemies, the open enemies, the ones that confront you in the open, the ones that don't like you. And what happens with Virgo? It starts to not like itself. It has doubts. It worries. It worries that, if, for instance, a Virgo woman was cooking at home and she were adding all the ingredients to her food.
Right.
Her husband will come home and she'll badger the husband into, was it salty enough? Was it
yes.
Was it sweet enough? Did you like what I cooked?
Was it overcooked?
Was the pasta overcooked?
Yeah, was it dry?
Was it undercooked? Yeah. Are you feeling okay? Are you okay? Do you still like me? Do you still love me? Or don't you love me? Is there something I did wrong? And this is the problem with Virgo because of its position as the culmination of all that was good has come to an end.
But I want to just make this point because the last little bit, Scorpios can be like that too, but the Virgo doesn't really mean it. It's just the persistent way
Right.
the Scorpio really means it. But it can be confusing.
This Virgo is
Right.
mostly for talk.
It's just to keep the momentum
Like,
going, right?
belongs to the bird family.
There's a wringing of hands, worry all the time.
It belongs to the bird family.
Yeah.
And what do birds do? They constantly sing. So how do you deal with Virgo? You have to ignore half of what comes out of their mouths. But getting back to Virgo with sadness can be rather difficult for Virgos to deal with
Oh,
because they feel that their whole person appears sad to everybody. So they're self-conscious that, oh, they saw something wrong with me. And now they're having the problem of being sad and worrying about whether somebody else thinks that was a good or a bad thing going on with them. They're worried about how they're perceived by others. And so sadness becomes very complex for the Virgo. They try to laugh when they're not really meaning to laugh. They try to get serious conversation when all they're trying to do is to distract their own state of sadness. All of that to convince you that they're not sad, even though you may not know that they're sad. But they know that they're sad, and in their minds, you must also know it because it's an imperfection.
well, I was thinking how the sign is the indicator of the harvest, time to harvest.
Well, that's would be Virgo.
And right, and so there would be a lot to worry about. Is there going to be enough? Is there? I think it's and
Will you be able to get it before the frost?
right,
And is it damaged? And
right, and the whole process, like all the whole process along the way is what they
all the work
supervise,
involved,
right?
and you did a lot of work to make something grow. You have a lot of work to be able to use that food for those crops for food.
Right.
So Virgo has this great responsibility.
Yeah.
So when they get sad, they'll tend to play
Yeah.
act. What you'll see from Virgo is playing out. They'll laugh oftentimes for no reason at all. That's because they have to convince you that they're not sad because they believe that you know that they're sad, or nobody may know anything about it. But they'll play act and to try to take you off guard, so to speak. And oftentimes they find out that there was no reason for it.
Yeah, they're actually stronger than they appear.
Well,
They actually are. You don't. Virgos surprise people. I
well,
think, a
stronger
lot.
in the fact that they don't die because of sadness. They don't die because of hardly
Yeah.
anything, but they
Well, and they have a
themselves.
persistence in any situation to find a way to be utilitarian in it. I
Well,
think
that's
that's
true.
really
That's true.
interesting about
That is how
that's
they
what I mean by them. That piece of them makes them much stronger than you'd expect.
activity, just like Gemini.
Yeah.
Activity is important for a Virgo because remember the planet Mercury is about a small planet which rotates around the sun very fast, and it's represented by Mercury, the metal that is liquefied and moves in all directions quickly. You can't hold it in one piece. And that's what you feel when you're around both Gemini and Virgo. The difference between them is that Gemini will entertain you with true intellectual capacity, whereas the Virgo oftentimes has to pretend. They're also very intellectually capable, but they'll pretend because they have doubt. And Virgo is riddled with doubts. So sorrow is oftentimes even misconstrued by themselves. They may be having
Right.
sorrow going on and not even be aware of it.
Right.
And in fact, that they're worried that others may see it when they are aware of it. Well, a lot of times others see it when they're not aware of it. And it shows through because you see that something has very, very much deviated from their normal nature. Sadness is something which clouds almost every individual in a way that's very similar.
I feel like Virgos kind of accept that there's always going to be a little pain happening in life. There's the like pain is just part of the process. I think Virgos just kind of like accept that as innate, and they just kind of go through whatever they're going
Well,
through.
let's remember that it's the sign that has to give birth.
Right.
It's that's what the egg is all about. It
And-
has to give
yeah.
birth, whether it
And
wants
they're
to
just,
or
they're
not.
just like, well, I'll go through the pain, and then that's it. Then,
And that's the reason it's dualistic.
I got all
It
this
has-
other stuff. Yeah,
It has to be a virgin,
Yeah.
meaning
that's
purity,
really something.
pure, and it
Mhm.
has to give birth, which means it's not Virgin anymore. So there's your duality in Virgo.
It's really interesting to look at the signs from these ways, like just kind of drop a topic and go, yeah, maybe
You won't
I'd love
hear
to have like 12 other astrologers around me and just being able to have this
yeah,
conversation with them
you
for
won't hear too many people talk about the duality of Virgo the way I
right.
have just described it.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Everybody has so many different things that they hone in on. It's interesting. So, and then so next, oh, here this is where we get into a situation. Good Libra.
Libra sadness. Color my world.
Please.
Color my world. This is Libra.
Ooh.
It's color my world.
Yeah.
It's being friends with everybody. When they're sad, they get erratic.
Mm.
It loses total ability to balance. This is what Libras are really good at. And when we say they balance, they're aware of the two extremes that go on all the time between people, between conditions, situations. When they become sad, they almost accuse themselves of causing the sadness. Because what happens to them in sadness is that they're no longer moving across the scale. Libra is always moving across the scale. 1 minute it's happy, 1 minute it's sad, 1 minute it's good, 1 minute it's bad. But when they're sad, when we mean that they're sad for a period of time, they're no longer moving across the scale. And so they happen to be stuck in one area where they feel negativity, where they feel like they've not accomplished something,
Right.
that they've lost an ability to communicate with others. Because Libra, after all, wants to generate goodwill amongst people, to be friendly. Friendly is a very important part of Libra. If we go to the counterpart of Libra in Chinese astrology, it's represented by the dog,
Right.
which is loyal, it's friendly, it's wise, it's patient. These are qualities that escape the Libra when they're in a state of sadness. They become melancholic. When you meet, melancholy is a quality that's attributed to Libra more than any other sign. Becomes melancholic in the sense that they almost marry the idea of being sad. It's almost as if this is a crusade. This is a crucible that they carry. And when you meet these types, sadness has been something that's been part of their lives throughout their lives when you meet melancholic types. So melancholic types exceed the idea of sadness the way we're describing other people going through sadness. With Libra, it's abandoning the whole joy of interacting with all sides of society.
I've seen Librans like
They become isolated almost.
yeah, but I've also seen them take on these like strange like personality expressions in their face to express almost like they take on a completely different character. It's almost like a whole different person pops out for a little bit,
Right.
and then but when I see it, it just looks to me like I'm looking at them going, "Oh, well, that was an interesting choice." It's still the person, but the Libra that's expressing that thinks that they really are that thing right now.
Mhm.
It's
And
interesting.
the only
Yeah.
way you might even begin to break up the melancholy, which is very, very difficult to get somebody out of that state, melancholic state. And of course, when we talk about these different emotional expressions of sadness or any other of the psychological qualities, we're talking about the average person. We're not,
Well,
certainly
they're
not.
going to be their depression is gonna be from a sense of uselessness,
Well, what I meant to say
purposelessness,
is that
because they're the universal partner.
right. So the fact that they're melancholic, there's only one way to reach a Libra that, or the melancholic type, in my mind, as I understand it, and that is to continue to remain positive no matter how much it may hurt you because
Right.
you're not getting a positive response from them. But the
Yeah.
more you remain positive, the more they have a difficulty in not excusing their state or to maintain that state
Right.
because you're
That's right.
smiling all the
That's
time.
right.
And at some point in
That's
time, they have to
right.
confirm that they
That's
understood
right.
you.
That's
And to
right.
understand a smiley person, you have to smile back.
Right.
It's the only way you can really.
That's
How
right.
else? How else do you tell somebody I concur with you, I agree with you, I'm on your side,
I
or I
would
think the
say
same way?
a Libra, the best way to reach a Libra is to disarm them. That's the
Right,
best way
to
to reach
disarm,
them.
because that's the quality
And
they have on others, is disarming, because of their friendliness. And that's really the only way to get to them, is to
right.
remind them of their own nature.
I mean, we all have a tendency to look at people and get righteous about them not speaking correctly or whatever to us. But, you know, if we can just sort of get past that and think about, well, how do I want this to work? How do I want this to work? Oh, okay, yes, I do. So I'm going to try this thing that might work. So, but yeah, I think that's a really interesting. Oh,
So,
and
so far we've given you a
we're
little
looking at
bit
the
about
time
this
here.
idea
Oh,
of sadness.
we're actually at the top of the hour.
Yeah. So we've given you an idea of going through the astrological signs. On our next presentation,
I guess we'll yeah
we'll
finish
complete the signs
Libra
and the sadness, and then move on to
and
other
just keep
things.
talking about it. I thought it was a rather interesting topic, and
No,
if
it was
there's
a good
anything that you
topic.
feel like just having a conversation about, like,
Right,
oh,
right,
how would you think of the signs in
right.
this capacity?
If you
It's
happen to stop
yeah,
in the chat room when we're on, please connect with us. We're happy to talk about anything, especially if you are curious about your astrological nature. We'll give you a short reading, but you'll be surprised at how much we'll have to say about you. In any event, till the next time, we bid you farewell.
yes. All our love and travel light.